for today. I have been working with Usanas Foundation for almost 2 years, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all for this special event, the book launch of Dr. Abhinav Pandya, latest work, Inside the Terrifying World of Jaish-e-Mohammed. This marks his third book, and we are honored to have such esteemed guest with us today. To begin with the proceedings, I would like to invite the director of Usanas Foundation, Dr. Anita Jain, to deliver her welcome remarks.
Thank you, Nikita. Good afternoon. Dear friends, on behalf of Usanas Foundation, I would like to extend a warm and hearty welcome to today's special guest, to Honorable Minister Shri Hardeep Singh Puri, our chief guest and keynote speaker for today's event. I also extend a warm welcome to Shri Tejendra Khanna Sahab, Ambassador Anil Trigunayak, General Atta Hasnain, General R.K. Sahani, Mr. S.M. Sahai, our speaker in today's event, and our special guest, Madam Puri. And my very warm welcome to all our esteemed guests from the diplomatic, security, media, and academic fraternity. It is indeed a moment of pride and special joy for us to host this book launch, Inside the Terrifying World of Jaish-e-Mohammed, authored by Dr. Abhinav Pandya, founder and CEO of Usanas Foundation. HarperCollins has released the book. Since Dr. Pandya's background is in counterterrorism, this subject has been one of the key focus areas for Usanas Foundation since our inceptions. Over the last 4 years, we have organized online and offline events on terrorism and counterterrorism. This year, our scholar program focused on this subject where global experts like Dr. Michael Rubin, Dr. Rohan Gunratna, Dr. General Atta Hasnain, James Dorsey, and Mr. S.M. Sahai deliver lecture on various aspects of terrorism. This book, Inside the Terrifying World of Jaish-e-Mohammed, is very special to us because with this, Dr. Pandya's Kashmir trilogy is completed, and sharing very good news that book has already become a bestseller. This book, along with previous 2 books, Radicalization in India and Exploration and Terror Financing in Kashmir, provide an in-depth understanding of the Kashmir conflict. In this journey of 4 years, we have organized 70+ webinars and released around 400 publications, including articles, issue briefs, research papers, and reports. We also released an online book titled Current Trend in Terrorism and Counterterrorism. We have organized 3 Maharana Pratap annual geopolitics dialogues in partnership with Ministry of External Affairs and 2 Usanas Scholar Program. Maharana Pratap Dialogue have become an international brand now where we get top-class experts on IR and security from across the world. In MPAGD 2023, Croatia's former Prime Minister, Mrs. Kolinda Grabar, joined us as the keynote speaker, and in MPAGD 2024, Jordan's former Deputy Prime Minister, Javed Al-Anani, joined as the keynote speaker. And realizing the importance of climate change and environment, we are expanding in this domain. Usanas Foundation's activity have been covered by national and international media, Economic Times, Sunday Guardian, NewsX, India Blooms, Dainik Bhaskar, Rajasthan Patrika, IANS, and PTI have covered our event. So far, 30 research scholars and students interned with us. They come from diverse range of prestigious institutions, including O.P. Jindal Global University, King's College London, IIT Indore, Rashtriya Raksha University, Symbiosis Pune, Jadavpur University, Delhi University, NLU Bangalore, London School of Economics, Our internal affiliation, several prestigious names such as THESEM, Aristotle University, Greece, Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researcher, US, Jerusalem Institute of Strategy and Security, Israel, Central University of Jammu, Taipei Economic and Cultural Center, Manipal University, Argate Technologies, APRI, Armenia, Network State, Armenia, India, Narrative and Logical India. Before we move on to our opening remark, we have a small presentation for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your kind words and setting the tone for today. I would like to call upon stage Honorable Minister Hardeep Singh Puri, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, Dr. Abhinav Pandya, and Shri Rajendra Khanna. And Shri Rajendra Khanna, sir, on stage. Rajendra Khanna. Now, I would like to invite Ambassador Anil Trigunayat to deliver his opening remarks. Ambassador Anil Trigunayat who is the advisor to Usanas Foundation and the Linguist Fellow at VIF. He has served in the Indian missions in Nigeria, Libya, and Jordan. In the Ministry of External Affairs, he has worked as an economist, West Asia and North Africa and Consular Divisions. He has also served as the Director General, Joint Secretary for the Gulf and Hajj Divisions in the NEA.
Namaskar. Good afternoon to everyone. It is my great pleasure and honor to welcome Honorable Shri Hardeep Singh Puri ji, who is the Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas, and he has been my guru in service. It is a great pleasure honoring him as our chief guest today because during his term, he has been trend-setting in several areas. He has been one of the founder negotiators of our trade-related matters at the WTO and GATT. At the United Nations, something that he pioneered, apart from India's quest for a permanent seat and the UN reforms, he has also been pushing very actively the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. And that is why it is so very relevant today. It is also a great pleasure to welcome Honorable Shri Rajendra Khanna ji, former Lieutenant Governor of Delhi, with whom I had great association when he was the Commerce Secretary and then Lieutenant Governor. And of course, the star of the afternoon and evening, Mr. Abhinav Pandya. Among the distinguished guests today, we have Ambassador Lakshmi Puri, who was my boss in the Ministry of External Affairs, several ambassadors, generals, former chiefs of various intelligence agencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Abhinav is one of the few people who have really worked and made it a mission to identify and find exactly how the terrorism and the terrorists and extremists and radicalized people work in India. We have a dearth of sufficient literature on the matter. There are some articles written here, some books have been written, but the kind of painstaking research that Abhinav has done in a very difficult terrain, that is in Kashmir. So his expertise in Jammu and Kashmir, having worked there, has produced at least 3 books, and I'm sure some more will come. This book on Jaish-E-Mohammad, and as General Hassan was saying, he would like to change the title of the book, so I'll leave it to him. But this is his 3rd book. I must say, I have just seen it, I have not read it. But his earlier 2 books, one on radicalization in India, and other is how the terror financing is done in Jammu and Kashmir. Those are eye-opening books, basically. Friends, as you all know, terrorism is a universal problem, but it is also mired by duplicity and double standards of the major powers. Until 9/11 happened, and we were suffering from cross-border terrorism from Pakistan, and ironically, today our External Affairs Minister is in Islamabad for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, whose main objective is also to fight against terror. That's why they have the REDS structure and all. But this duplicity and double standards that we see on a daily basis, not only from countries that are sponsoring terrorism like Pakistan, but also from their benefactors like the United States. Canada, yesterday, you have seen what happened. Everybody knows. United States, the Western countries, they have been giving a lot of support, sustenance, pandering them, politicizing. They're enabling them in their countries to work against India's security interests. So we have to be very vigilant. India has been always talking about this. Prime Minister Modi in 2015, when he was in the United Nations, he lamented the fact that till today, we have not been able to have a definition of terrorism or terrorist. He has been recalling it off and on, talking in every single forum. We have been fighting it ourselves in a very vigilant manner. But this is a one-time security lapse. We have seen it. It is affecting us at all times in every which way. Now, as far as Jaish-E-Mohammed is concerned, they call themselves an army of Muhammad. And this also started in 99, around that time, when we had to leave 3 of the very well-known terrorists who are notorious, but we had to exchange them. And then Indian Airlines plane, as you must have seen nowadays, there is a series on the Netflix as well. And since then, the Masood Azhar became the man who has vowed to decimate India, who's been active, who has been behind and involved in the attacks on Indian Parliament and in the several of these acts, and has gone away. As you will see and hear, that there has been in Pakistan a very smooth mechanism that they have created. Keep changing names. When somebody comes under designation by the UN Security Council 1267 Committee, they immediately change the names, and China plays that role of putting a block, technical block on them. So there is this kind of hypocrisy that we have to look at, call out at all times, and of course, we have to make our country as strong and impervious to such attacks. I will just quote Prime Minister Modi briefly on one of the last meetings that he was there, and he said it, and you all must have heard the story of Bhasmasur. Pakistan today talks about that they are suffering from terrorism. They have at least a minimum of 48 big, well-known terror groups operating out of their country, and some thousands of other smaller splinter groups. And still, they have been able to encash their nuisance value with USA, China, and Russia, all the powers, under the garb of one pretext or the other. So this is what we have seen. Last time when the 70th anniversary of the UN, Prime Minister Modi spoke about this, the 76th UNGA, he said that the danger of regressive thinking and extremism was also rising in the world. Regressive thinking के साथ जो देश आतंकवाद का पॉलिटिकल टूल के रूप में इस्तेमाल करते हैं, उन्हें ये समझना होगा कि आतंकवाद उनके लिए भी उतना ही बड़ा खतरा है. So this is the crux of it. You cannot on the one hand be supporting terrorists and terror groups for cross-border terrorism and a zero-sum policy with India, and on the other hand you think that it's not going to work. And that's where the story of Bhasmasur tells you that at the end of the day, this is going to get at you. So that is very important. As far as this book is concerned, we'll be hearing from the author and it will be discussed quite a lot. But once again, I'm very grateful to you all and especially Honorable Minister to have spared some time with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your insightful words. Now it's time for the highlight of our event, the book launch. I would like to invite our chief guest, Shri Hardeep Singh Puri, Honorable Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas, Government of India, to lead the book launch. I would also like to invite Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, Shri Rajendra Khanna, and Dr. Abhinav Pandya to join him for the launch. Thank you so much. Now I would like to request Shri Hardeep Singh Puri to kindly deliver his keynote address.
Shri Tejinder Khanna ji, former Lieutenant Governor of Delhi and a very distinguished public servant. My younger colleague Anil Trigunayat, the distinguished author Abhinav Pandya ji, and there were so many distinguished members of the gathering here this afternoon that if I were to start acknowledging all of them, but I would still need to acknowledge some of them because they have also worked in the long process and the struggle against the terrifying world of terror. General Atta Hasnain, my friend Rajiv Jain, perhaps more anonymously, and General Sani. So many, I mean, there's so many people I can readily identify with that struggle. Let me start by posing a simple question which might be arising in your minds. What is the Minister for Petroleum and Natural Gas doing, releasing a book on the Jaish-E-Mohammad inside the terrifying world of terror? The only reason I could think of, and to me that was the only reason which prompted me to be here this afternoon, was that when my young colleague went through the book and discussed it with me, I immediately realized that this was the work of a scholar who had taken deep pains to interview those who are ready to stand up and talk on the subject, but equally and if not more important, those who don't wish to openly identify themselves with the views that they expressed. Because this book needs to be given the widest of dissemination, if for no other reason that unless we realize and fully comprehend what kind of an organization or entity the Jaish-E-Mohammed, or as my friend Anil was saying, when it's subjected to international scrutiny and pressure from the Security Council or from other parts of the civilized world, they also metamorph and change their nature and become the same entities by a different name. So unless this is widely understood, I think our response to the issue of global terror will be incomplete. I must also, before I proceed to share with you some views, I don't want to pompously label what I'm going to say as a keynote address, but some reflections from someone who has had the privilege in a long career of dealing with different aspects of the ecosystem of global terror. At a reasonably young age, I was posted in Colombo. I was first secretary and then counselor political in the Indian mission there. In the immediate aftermath of the Sri Lankan ethnic crisis, assuming great proportions, I interacted with different groups. We chose to call them militant groups rather than terrorist groups. We were faulted for that. I can recall meeting with the leaders of PLOT, PLOTE, TELO, EPRLF, LTTE. In fact, I was finally the one designated, along with a naval officer, a colleague of mine, Captain B.K. Gupta, to go to Jaffna and from a particular place there to bring Shri Velupulai Prabhakaran, the LTTE Supremo, to New Delhi for discussions with the then Prime Minister, Shri Rajiv Gandhi, and the rest is history. I also served in London, where I had a privilege, if you choose to call it so, of dealing with different members of the global terror establishment in a backdoor format. And then I went to Geneva from there as ambassador and permanent representative, and I discovered the extent of the duplicitous double talk which I think Anil was referring to. In my very first meeting with the head of a Western delegation to the Human Rights Commission, it was called the Commission then, or is it? Yeah. Human Rights Commission. I think the March 2022. And the beginnings of non-state actors who had started assuming the role of major terror entities was already clear. But it was being argued by some of our friends in the Western world that non-state actors, ranging from individuals who are vulnerable, they have to face a strong state, and the whole gamut of human rights should be looked at in that context. Even without knowing too much about how the debate was going to unfold, I was able then to anticipate that these assertions coming from traditional Western political philosophy were going to be flawed. And then came 9/11. And I think prior to 9/11, whenever we spoke, or rather I spoke on behalf of my country to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in London or to others, The distinct impression we got was that this was someone else's problem. Because of our geographical location, we were at the receiving end of a country which decided to use terror as an instrument of foreign policy and security policy. And we became used to cross-border terrorism in all its forms. But the world still thought that that was a particular problem of South Asia or of some other part of the world which was dealing with. Then came 9/11, and I think thinking began to change. I want to fast forward from that. I ended up in New York in 2009. We were elected to the Security Council in 2011, and we were on the council from 2011 and 12. In the aftermath of the 9/11 events, the 1373 or counterterrorism committee was established. Because it was a fundamental paradigmatic shift in the Western world's thinking of terrorism and the world of counterterrorism, they decided immediately after its establishment that only members of the permanent members of the Security Council would chair it. And that was the situation till we came on the council in 2011. And for a variety of reasons, they made that departure in the case of India, and I was the first chair of the Counterterrorism Committee of the United Nations Security Council, or the 1373 Committee. And what I witnessed there, and I'm on record, what I'm saying here is no different from what I have said earlier, that was naked power play. You had clear evidence that some individuals were being financed, carried out acts of violent extremism, cross-border terrorism. There was the issue of terror financing. At the end of 2012, there's an annual conference. We instilled the zero tolerance norm there, which is still the norm on paper. But people were trying to navigate out of this through definitional things. And as Anil pointed out, I think whether it was the 1373 committee or the 1267 Al-Qaeda Sanctions Committee, very often all the efforts made by us to designate particular entities as terror outfits and have them proscribed either met a block or a hold by some other permanent member of the Security Council for political reasons. I don't think anybody doubted that. And finally, when the pressure that we were able to generate was beyond managing by them, they succumbed and agreed to it. And then the terror entity would metamorph and rediscover itself and call itself something else. And that is, I think, something that you need to also study this book on. I have never been particularly impressed with the problems that anybody faces in understanding this whole issue of definition of terrorism. I think there is a global consensus on that. If you meaning any individual or any entity comprising of a group of individuals, carries out acts which have the effect of unleashing violence, perpetrating fear and destruction, particularly involving civilians, then that is a terror, act of terror or a definition of terrorism. The problems arose essentially because notable or noble objectives were sought to be achieved by this, and they never got very far because they got embroiled in different kinds of histories. What we have faced in the state of J&K for several decades, and what this book brings out in terms of research, talking to people, and the transformation that you see today, and this is not a political meeting where I want to score points, but I think there is a great lesson that even the most complicated of phenomena of dangers like terrorism can be dealt with. One is the physical response that you meet to a terror group by the security forces or those involved in insurgency or counter-terrorist operation. That's one aspect. But there is another aspect to that. These groups seek funding, they seek inspiration, they seek support through the democratic freedoms that we have to offer. And ultimately, and these were my discussions with the FCO in London or with concerned agencies elsewhere where I've been posted, that the least we can do is to be discerning as to where democratic freedoms are being misused to carry out acts of terror which may not affect you, because you are looking at this in terms of democratic freedoms or human rights, but it results in violence and death being perpetrated on somebody else's territory. I think those, whatever the English expression is, chicken are coming home to roost now. Because slowly the terror network expands its fangs, and it also, there was this famous saying, I think it was by Hillary Clinton, when there were acts of terror in our neighboring country. And I think she said something to the effect that you can't encourage the growth of vipers in your backyard and expect them not to bite you. And the number of stories of where states or responsible entities provide encouragement to such entities, and then they turn rogue or go beyond the control, I think is also legion. What we need today, I think, is also to understand that much of the counter-terror network and architecture is inherently flawed because it is donor-driven. This is a point I was discussing with Lakshmi last night when I realized I had to be here. We need to get far higher degree of understanding and consciousness of the problems of terror by understanding its true nature, so that a donor-driven narrative can't derail the conclusions that we reach. And I think the advance of technology and the fantastic mobilization capacity, both in terms of resources, technology, which terror entities now increasingly display, also makes it imperative for us to build the safeguards within our society. And those safeguards will only be built provided you have an understanding. And I want to compliment the author. I mean, all those chapters, I glanced through them. I wish I had more time to read them. These are the works of a scholar. He has gone into the problem. He has tried to understand the issues. He has interviewed people who have first-hand experience of dealing with it. If this is disseminated, and this then becomes not just a case study of a terrorist entity, it then occupies a very significant part of an entire library shelf on terror that we need to be able to do. I think we should, frankly, I don't know this foundation or others, they need to study all terror networks all over the world, not only for an understanding of their practices, but also their motivations, their financial support, and how these entities are misused for political ends. They don't even respond to their own charters. I mean, I can think readily of groups like operating in Africa, Al-Shabaab, I mean, Jaish-E-Mohammad, Lashkar-e-Toiba, several others I can think of. And they all appear in and different forms were linkages. I want to conclude by expressing the hope that I was very happy to say that it's already become a bestseller. Very good. I can understand an interest in it, but I think the message needs to be carried through the world of academia. Here you come from St. Stephen's College. I spent a year on the teaching faculty there. I think that the understanding of the current geopolitical situation and how, I'm not saying that terror is the most important determinant, I'm not saying that, but it is an important component. You cannot understand current geopolitical situation and even close to home. I don't mean just Pakistan, I mean countries more towards the Gulf. You've got so many non-state actors operating there. Each one of them would have an objective, a role to fulfill. But at the end of the day, it all transcends into a network which needs to be understood. So I compliment you for your work. I wish the publication all success. Your publisher, HarperCollins, is also the publisher of my first book, Perilous Interventions. I'm not here to promote that book, but some of the paralysis that we see in the Security Council following the problems that arose on Libya and Syria when we were presiding over the Security Council has resulted in a paralyzed Security Council. Why is that serious? Because the Security Council is the one designated agency in the multilateral system which has been designated the authority to make a determination on what constitutes a threat to peace and security. And after it makes that determination, it is the only designated agency which is allowed to authorize all means necessary within quotes, which means countermeasures. But unfortunately today, whoever wants to go to war against someone else does so without even the courtesy of a reference to the Security Council. So if we get disappointed that entities are not being named or proscribed as a result, I think we should be equally alarmed and equally disturbed by the fact that you have an entirely dysfunctional Security Council, which of course also reinforces the need for reform and a revised multilateral order with India occupying its rightful place as a permanent member. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable words. I would like to call Abhinav, sir, to please felicitate our chief guest.
Thank you. Sir. These are books I want. Thank you. I'll send you my books also. Thank you.
Now, I invite Shri Rajendra Khanna, former Lieutenant General of New Delhi, to deliver kindly. Lieutenant Governor of. Yeah, that is. Okay. Now we'll be having a 10-minute discussion on the book with our honorable chief guest, and we can invite questions from your side. We have a question.
माइक दे दीजिए उनको. ये ले लो एक माइक.
Sir, good afternoon to you. I am Kapil. Sir, as you rightly said that Mr. Narendra Modi told that we still don't have the definition of terrorism. Now, if we see the broad paradigm of terrorism which is ongoing in the world, we still feel that there is no end state which is clearly visible. We have so many tanzeems which are working, which are operational all over the world, but we don't find a convergence. Or rather the question is there a convergence at all? What is the end state of this terrorism? Do they want to take over the world and declare something like what we read called Ummah and then produce something new? But what the question today is, we really don't know that what the end state of all these sects are. So would you like to please comment upon this, that how do we see terrorism unfolding on a daily basis, or what is the near future of all these tanzeems which are emanating, all these sects which are emanating? Thank you.
Kapilji, let me first address the, you've made different points, but let me address the first of them, on the issue of definition of terrorism. You are right, the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, which was an idea floated by many countries, including to India, that remained inconclusive because some countries believed and some entities believed that one country's terrorist is another country's freedom fighter. But I don't think that held back the fight against terrorism. What is holding back a genuine global response to terror is the fact that each one of us, or rather many countries in the world, there are 193 member states in the UN, the South Sudan being the latest 193rd. Many countries believe that this is somebody else's problem. And each group, I've had a long association in different places, London, in New York, on the Security Council, elsewhere in Sri Lanka. If you were asking a question, it seems a very relevant question, but it's a very simplistic and very difficult to answer question. What do different groups want? General Hasnain and I have dealt with some groups, I know what they want. If you were to ask the people I used to deal with it as a young first secretary or a councillor in Sri Lanka, they wanted Elam. If you ask them, where is Elam going to come? Because if you look at, and I'm saying something in a lighter vein, so if somebody quotes me, I have a disclaimer right up front. I mean, Sri Lanka is it's not a country with a lot of landmass. So when you ask them, where is Elam going to be? Say, Elam is going to be some part of the north and a little bit part of the east. So you want to slice it away and that becomes Elam. He said, is that sustainable? Let's say even hypothetically as an argument, is that workable? There are some other stans which are being talked about there. Some part of that stan is in the figment of somebody's imagination. Other part will come through some part of Canada, or it'll come. It's a ridiculous situation. Somebody gets up and blows up an Air India plane. I mean, I'm giving you a real life example. It's a fact. And you refuse to extradite the people who are responsible for that act of terrorism. So, every group can have its own different. If you ask Mr. Masood Azhar, right? That's his name? Yeah. What is your wing? I don't care what his objective is. I don't care what his objective is. But if Masood Azhar is given sustenance by, first they say he's disappeared, they can't find him, then they find him, then they say he's changed his name, etc. I mean, there should be zero tolerance on this. And I think after a while the narrative is taken to the point where that zero tolerance comes, people say enough is enough, let's come down with a sledgehammer. But meanwhile that guy is, is like jelly, he's changed shape, etc. I wouldn't worry about too much, and I wouldn't look for the nuances, Kapilji, in terms of what different people want. Because if you get involved in that discussion, then you'll say, yaar, ye theek hai, iski demand to shari legitimate like that. Nothing doing. Today, if the international society is based on the rule of law and public order, no one should have the freedom to pick up a stone and hurl it at someone. I'm looking at my friend here, Aditya Raj. I mean, look at this. Look at the difference there in Kashmir. Today the hotels are booked. I was civil aviation minister. My God, I look at the number of flights there, chock-a-block full. Same place, same people. You have to step in and ensure that the space available for those individual terror entities is slowly circumscribed and then completely done away with. That is when you win the fight. And I wouldn't worry about what their end game is. I know what my end game is. For civilized open society, the end game is survival. And we run large open democratic systems, open space. Anybody wants to come and do it and tries to get away with it. In the heart of a city, you can come and say, you can take out, unleash physical violence. The use of violence against civilians, no matter what the cause. I think Lakshmi was pointing out the formulation in the Summit of the Future document, which the Prime Minister's language. That is absolutely correct. There should be no space for that. Now, I can say that that's my view, and I think everybody agree with me that's a view. But then you've got to get your state systems prepared to ensure that those guys don't get more freedom. And the countries which have been giving them freedom, I'm telling you, no matter what they say openly, etc., they are beginning to realize that this viper which you are rearing in your backyard is going to come and bite you as well.
Thank you, sir.
Before we have more questions, I would just like to recall an incident. Honorable Minister Puri, thank you very much for your most insightful and encouraging remarks. This is a great motivation for young scholars like me if you have such a high appreciation for my work. So this happened back in the year 2002. I was in my second year undergrad at St. Stephen's College, and we had a society called Commonwealth Society of India, and it was headed by Professor Vinod Chaudhary. He used to teach economics at St. Stephen's College. And back in those days, they organized one exchange visit to UK. Honorable Minister Puri was posted there in UK then, and they organized one little discussion for our young students group, a roundtable discussion. We went there, and I distinctly remember, there was one young scholar. She was an exchange student from US, and she asked a little obnoxious question regarding the human rights situation and all. And sir gave a very strong and a befitting reply to her. So that actually was the beginning of my career in international relations and foreign policy.
Vinod Chaudhary was not only, he was a lecturer in economics in St. Stephen's College later, but he was part of our debating circuit. So Vinod and his sister, who subsequently joined the IAS, Neeta Chaudhary, no, it's correct, am I maybe making sense? But Vinod was a very articulate person, very, very perceptive, and he chose a world in academics. So I remember him with great affection. So he contacted me when I was Deputy High Commissioner in London, and I readily agreed to this interactive session. So there's one. But let me just, on your book, I was very thrilled. A lot of people, by the way, just to set the record, a lot of people ask me, how come you don't accept invitations? So I said, but this is something special. If an Indian scholar has actually worked on it and produced a first-class book, well, there will be people who will say, ye bhi hona chahiye, wo bhi. Don't fall for that. I've never come across any successful author who's not told, ki yaar ye bhi angle dekh lena. Okay, bola agli bari dekh lenge. That's a good one. But this deserves to be applauded. It deserves to be saying, because you're taking a tough subject. When I wrote Perilous Intervention, I was told by all my friends, because I have a chapter on Sri Lanka in that. I don't know if I've been able to write it after I became a minister, but I was told by everyone whom I interacted with me that, this is such a strong book that you won't have any friends left in the United States. You know what I said? I said, that's not the thought that crossed my mind when I wrote the book. It so happened that just before the book came out, the Obama administration changed its official stance on what happened in Libya and Syria. In Libya, I used to have Susan Rice, who was my counterpart in the Security Council, the American ambassador, tell me, you don't know, Hardeep, you don't know the yearning for democracy on Arab streets. So I said, I know it as much as you know it. And then, they appointed a person as ambassador to Libya. Benghazi, he was there. My friend has been in Libya, he'll remind me of the name. So at night, there were a lot of shouting crowds. They thought the crowd had come to welcome the newly appointed ambassador. Naam kya tha uska yaar? Chris. Oh, they came to lynch him. This is terrorism, yaar. What are we discussing? Because I think her analysis that Arab Street was yearning for this thing was correct, but there were other people also involved in there. And what happened after that is history. So, I mean, you know, when perilous intervention got published at that stage, by that time American policy had changed. And by the way, if you want to ever look at the literature on the use of force, it's cited as a textbook now. I took up Libya, I took up Syria. Libya because there was a Security Council resolution supporting the use of force. Syria, we tried our best in the Security Council. 2 permanent members didn't allow it to take place. I've got chapters on Crimea. I have Crimea, I mean, then unthinkable today. So then I have a chapter on Sri Lanka and said this was our perilous intervention. Agree or don't agree, I mean, that people also thought we were going to make peace there. We wanted to make peace. But you know what you ended up doing? So that world of terror requires to be studied much more. I'm glad today at least it's a mainstream subject in Indian academics. But at those days, I mean, look at the literature, there wasn't hardly any literature. So when something like this comes along, I think it's very well done. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We can take 2 more questions. Okay, 3 more questions before we move on to...
My friend Aditya Raj called.
Mr. Puri, as a former senior diplomat representing India, especially in the United Kingdom, I want to ask you about Minister Puri, thank you very much. My question is, as a former senior diplomat representing India, especially in the UK, you know about an Indian diplomat 40 years ago, Ravindra Matre, who was killed. And my question is about the security of the Indian diplomats who represent India, especially in countries where there have been attacks on Indian missions, etc. Now, for the last 24 to 48 hours, we've seen an Indian diplomat, a senior Indian diplomat, Sanjay Kumar Verma. His videos are going viral on some groups with his photograph being pumped with bullets. And now this particular country calls for his expulsion. But my overall question is not regarding this particular Canada incident, but about the security of the diplomats in terrorism. How does one ensure that, as India being the leading voice of terrorism and the Western countries preaching us about rules-based order and democracy?
No. First of all, the security of any representative should be a matter of concern for all governments. And I speak here in my personal capacity. Yes, I know the Mhatre case. I've served in that country, in the aftermath of that. I have also witnessed other threats to the physical threats to people who represent India. I've been at the receiving end of some of those threats, so I know that, I fully comprehend that. I think it is incomprehensible that in the name of freedom of expression, etc., you allow the photograph, whether on social media or etc., portrait of a head of mission and with different people firing plastic, whatever, bullets at it. Look, it's a symbology. And I can tell you, I'm not because I'm a member of this team, our responses on all these things have been exemplary. And I think they will realize when we start calibrating our response. I read the statement of the Ministry of External Affairs and it filled me with pride. They were called a spade. And this process, I don't want to comment on it because the MES statement speaks for itself. But listen, this happens everywhere. It can happen to anyone. So let's be very, very careful. If you allow a person who is in the discharge of his duties to become a subject for this thing, I've seen my colleagues in different places being attacked in gurudwaras, etc. I mean, it's unbelievable what's going on. And then we speak about the rule of law.
Namaskar, sir. I am Anupam. Sir, since ages we are observing that especially US always try to intervene in terrorism, and they fund terrorists. Even in present context we have seen in Bangladesh. Sir, how you see it? It will hinder the India's vision of development and uh,
Anupamji, I want to skirt that question. Insofar as US position on terrorism is concerned, I think it's a pretty clear position. On other issues, I think we can have a discussion. And I want to leave Bangladesh out of it because I don't think it fits into that classical discussion. I mean, and I think if Jaishankarji comes here tomorrow or whenever you get him on another platform, I mean, that's a question best addressed there. All I can say is that the zero tolerance norm which the international community or the multilateral world has adopted should be adhered to. And it should be adhered to by all countries. And that post 9/11, what is absolutely clear, that it can't be that terrorism is your problem and not my problem. Yeah, I think this is the paragraph I was actually, because I decided not to use any papers. This is that India has reason to be satisfied with the strong commitment within quotes to pursue a future free from terrorism and to combat it and violent extremism conducive to terrorism. In unquote, in every way and at all levels, including through revitalizing the Convention Against Terrorism, which I was referring to. The PPF condemned terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, committed by whomever, wherever, whenever. All terrorist acts are criminal acts and unjustifiable, regardless of motivation or how their perpetrators may seek to justify. This is the crux of it. All terrorist acts, in all its forms and manifestations, committed by whoever, it doesn't matter whether it's being committed by X or Y. These are all criminal acts, unjustifiable, and whoever may be the perpetrator needs to be condemned. I think this is also language from the PPF, the Summit of the Futures also. This is the crux of it. Thank you.
Sir, yes, sir. This way, sir. So my name is Rakesh Sharma, sir. My question refers to your repeated references of your being chairman of the counterterrorism committee, is also of the president of the Security Council. But this is an era, 32 odd wars are on in the world, an era of conflict management by authoritarianism. Jiski lati uski bhains. There is no rule of law left. There is no value of the Security Council at all, sir. And then, or any one of the other associations, UCOMOC or ECO or OSCE or whoever. So where is the world moving to, sir? Who is responsible for peace in this world at all now, sir?
General Sahib, I agree with you completely. That's why I said we are dealing with a dysfunctional Security Council. Let me just repeat for the sake of clarity that the Security Council is the only designated agency which under international law has the authority to make a determination of what constitutes a threat to peace and security. That's the only agency. Individually you can't. I mean, you can decide if you're commanding a force, you can decide you can make war against X or Y or Z. That's a different issue. But that will be a unilateral act. Now, if anyone is threatened, he or she or whatever country, she can come to the Security Council and say, hey, I am being threatened. And the Security Council make a determination whether there is a threat to international peace and security. If it's you fighting your neighbor because of the apples grown in your backyard are not being evenly shared, that's not a Security Council matter. We're talking about international peace and security. But having made that determination, the real power of the Security Council lies in the fact that they will be able to then authorize, it's called all means necessary, that's a language within quotes, which means authorize countermeasures, that is use of force. In Libya, we authorized counter force because there was a problem coming at the state. In Syria, we couldn't because the permanent members of it. But since the Libya and Syria period, Security Council is plagued. It's paralyzed. So when you tell me that there are 32 conflicts going on, I agree with you. There may be more you and I may not be aware of. And today the threats to peace and security are not just all in terms of 155 millimeter howitzer being fired across the borders. The threats to international peace and security in that definition can come from paralyzing through cyber attacks. It can come through measures to undermine or completely paralyze energy installation. A lot of things can happen. But nobody bothers to go to the Security Council. So I agree with you. In fact, you've been polite. I mean, when I'm not on this side of the dais, I use much stronger language. And then on top of that, these guys turn around and give us a lecture on the rule of law. They're unbelievable. Today it's a dysfunctional multilateral order, and you said that jiski lathi uski bhans, you're absolutely correct, yaar. But that is what gives me, as somebody who spent 39 years in the Foreign Service, 6 years in the world of, I was a senior vice president of the International Peace Institute, Secretary General of the Independent Commission on Multilateralism, appointed by the UN. I've done all those things. And now 8th year as a minister. But what gives me confidence that today's India stands up. Somebody acts funny with me, I'll tell them, hey, listen, guy, hey, yellow. You've got domestic political compulsions because you have a bunch of guys there who affect your electoral arithmetic or the prospects of it, and you take a stand and come be my guest, we'll deal with you. So I agree with you. But again, as I said, the Indian position on conflict is a very well considered position. It's a traditional, but I think the Prime Minister has articulated it more effectively. He's told all sides to the conflict, this is a time for peace, not for war. You need to use the instrument of diplomacy. So that part is being done more aggressively, and I think it's also sinking in somewhere. I'm not saying that's the total listing, because listen, if you are bent on, and some conflicts become what I call frozen conflicts. There you have to deal with them separately, then they get eclipsed by other arenas where conflict is arising. But my expectation in all this is, reform of the Council will not take place, or the UN will not take place tomorrow, not till the world is we're facing this conflict. But sooner rather than later, you will have to realize that the post-1945 security, the global architecture was a flawed one because it was based on the dictum, to the victor belong the spoils. All the guys who so-called won the Second World War were sitting as permanent members. But they're no longer part of that. There were other countries which did very well. Who are the world's third, fourth and fifth largest economies? Japan, Germany and India. And they're not on the council. Forget about anything else. It's the economic absurdity also. When tomorrow there is a problem somewhere in terms of, a tsunami, who does the heavy lifting? Our, rescue and rehabilitation effort becomes operational. So the world is like that. I expect better sense to prevail, and that all the guys who can make a difference to the evolution of the global turbulence, to calm it, slowly reach a position of cessation of hostilities, then wind back, etc. And after that, you'll have to look at multilateral institutions. Because none of them, this was in 1945, you wanted to create a post-Second World War order. But in that 7 decades plus, a lot of things have happened. But it's a very different world today.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would like to invite Shri Rajendra Khanna, former Lieutenant Governor of New Delhi.
Question already.
May I? You just raised the issue of terrorism affecting other areas, and you cited the example of energy installations.
Sir?
And you cited the example of energy installations.
Yeah.
And essentially how terrorism is used not just against nations, but also for economic agendas. I understand that your ministry is contemplating deep sea oil exploration in the Andamans. Something which we have been aware of for at least 60 years, but not been able to do. Something almost akin to state-sponsored or not even state-sponsored terrorism, but state intimidation, which has kept us from accessing that oil for 50 years. Since Sir John, I forget his full name, the MI6 in 1977 passed on that intimidating message to T.N. Gaul. Since then, we've capped any effort at which first began with the lesser depths. I understand that you are now contemplating a greater depths in the Andamans. Are we also contemplating security provisions which will secure that from terrorist attacks? Because that was the official reason cited.
No, I'm not aware of any intimidation by any MI6 or person to Mr. Call or anyone. I'm not familiar with it, but I'll tell you something. My understanding is that what has held back offshore deep sea is something more fundamental. Very few countries have that, or very few companies have that expertise to do that, number one. Number two, you can't do it without spending a lot of money. Number three, the person who is willing to make that investment, there are only 4 or 5 major oil companies in the world which are into this business, and there are some companies here. You need to spend a lot of money to do it. Now, if you look at the major finds in the world, they must have dug 16 wells and almost gave up till somebody said, "Yaar, ek 17th we try kar lo," and then they struck oil. In our case, the problem was more serious. We have something like 3.5 million square kilometers of sedimentary basin, and we were not exploring more than 6% of that. So recently, I think last year, the Prime Minister cleared 1 million out of those 3.5 million square kilometers for prospecting. Earlier, it was to be no-go area. Now, in the 9th round of OALP, that open acreage licensing policy, which we've just announced, 38% of the bids which have come are in that no-go area. So earlier there was neglect, criminal neglect. I don't think it was intimidation by anyone.
I think this was a policy.
Not policy. Yeah,
the intervention of the 7th Fleet, the territorial waters, the implications on that by the partition of Pakistan.
Very purani baat ho gayi. But uske baad, if I were to agree with you, then I'm giving a clean chit to the government which came after that. Arey bhai, they were not interested, yaar. They were not interested in the sense there was neglect bordering on criminal neglect. So now we are correcting that. We have 9th round, we've got 38% of the bids in there. The 10th round of open acreage licensing policy, which we've gone to the cabinet, got an approval, which is now before the thing, where, at the end of the day, we have got to change mindset also. We tell the exploration companies, come and be with us. I went to Brazil recently and told Petrobras has one unique capacity, that they have capacity for offshore deep sea off the Sao Paulo basin. And you said, you come and help us in the seismic and other work. We will incentivize you. You don't make any commitment on investment. You don't even need to spend any money. We will spend the money. If we strike oil, you will have the right to first refusal. So it's a change mindset. हमारी तरफ से भी अब उसका क्या कारण था? Were we acting in response of our own thing? Somebody else was controlling? I can spend an entire afternoon giving you my conspiracy theories.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would like to invite Shri Rajendra Khanna, former Lieutenant Governor of New Delhi, to kindly deliver his special remarks.
He has shown great consistency in announcing my name, Rajendra.
Apologies for the same, sir.
Honorable Union Minister for Petroleum and Natural Gas, and a very distinguished member of the civil service in the old days, the foreign service, and now, of course, the national government for the last 8 years and more. I had the privilege of receiving from him a gift of 4 of the books he had written. And I am very happy to state it was a pleasure reading each one of them. And when you suggested that you will pass on some copies to Abhinav Pandya ji, I'm sure you will also love reading books. I have read parts of the book written by Abhinav Pandya ji, also his terror financing in Kashmir, some parts of radicalization in India. Basically, thematically, there's a very clear focus on what these terror groups are doing to continue to mount terror attacks against our country, with a focus on Kashmir, but then also, it has also spread out to other parts of India, including the absolutely almost fatal attack on the National Parliament on the 13th of December 2001. My sense is, when you talk about why this terror is happening, I read a book also, Tariq Fateh, the well-known Pakistani gentleman who eventually left Pakistan and then settled in Canada. He used to be visiting India also. He said very clearly, I met him face to face, he said, unless you change the system of madrasa education where the basic brainwashing begins of little children, unless you change that, and they are constantly trying to, instill into their thought process. The only valid religion in the world is Islam. Everything else is virtually like, worth zero. It is a, kufr. The people who follow it are kafir. It's not going to work. This is a world with many, many religions. India is a country with great diversity of religions. And we have also had for thousands of years a legacy of total openness. Anybody can come in, he can take God's name in any way he likes, and he's welcome. Why the people from Israel, the Jewish nation, has such a close rapport and feeling of brotherhood with India? Because after the Romans' second destruction of their Jerusalem temple in AD 70, that is when the Jews first came to the west coast of India. They have established synagogues, they have lived here. And whatever it is, we have always had open arms. All our great religious teachers, whether it was Guru Nanak Dev, all the Honorable Reverend Sikh Gurus, they always said that the core of religion is love. Guru Gobind Singh Ji said, Saach kahu sun leo sabe, jin prem kiyo tin hi prabh payo. Guru Nanak Dev Ji said, Nanak naam chardi kala tere bhane sarbat da bhala, well-being of all. Now I want to say very clearly, I know that we have in this country a very large number of very, very devout Muslims. They carry out the core observances of their religion with great commitment, whether it is attending to their namaz, giving zakat, going for Hajj, etc. 99.9 maybe, 0.5%. Yeah, devout, good Muslim people, remembering God, nobody can have the least negative kind of perception about it. If anything, there should be great respect. And I said this many years ago in my first term as Lieutenant Governor. The High Commissioner of Pakistan was also in that meeting in the Ghalib Academy. I said we should learn 3 things from our Muslim brothers and sisters. 1, constant remembrance of the divine. Namaz 5 times a day. Secondly, living in the will of the Lord, Razi Baraza. And third, Haq Halal ki kamai. Earn your livelihood by honest means. I remember the comment which the High Commissioner of Pakistan made Sir, if people actually begin to look at Muslims in this way, India will be a paradise. My point is this: in the government system, today, we are not paying adequate attention to the messaging which is being given by misguided Islamic imams, preachers, the people who are conducting classes in the madrasas, that this is a country when we say Sarva Dharma Samman, and we respect all religions, so they have to tell those little children, we have respect for all religions in this great country of India. If they do not do it, and if I were in government, I would lock up the madrasa, finished. I give them notice for a little while. You will tell your children starting of the day, we respect all religions in the country. Whether it's a Hindu, it's a Muslim, it's a Christian, it's a Jain, it's a Buddhist, whatever. You have to teach them to respect all religions, not have a negative feeling, which some of these people have when they say, I read your book about this whole move towards what they call bringing about greater purity of Islam. Oh, damn well, you have the purity within yourself. Get rid of your negative tendencies. The jihad is supposed to be what they call, and Guru Gobind Singh said about the Khalsa. What is Khalsa? Khalsa is a person who has transcended the Panj Vikar, Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Hankar. He has conquered them. Daman kar liya usne. Wo Khalsa hai. And he said, I am the protector and the person who has launched the Khalsa with that definition. So today, are we paying attention to what are being taught in the madrasa? What are being taught in other kind of institutions? The so-called Tablighi Jamaat, you have referred to it again and again. Zakir Naik given a red carpet reception in Pakistan the other day. He is a person who has just basically spouted venom wherever he has gone. He says we want to basically force people to convert to Islam and to Sharia law across the world. It's not going to happen. And I say if Pakistan wants to go that direction, welcome. They're already, they are tasting the bitter fruits, what Honorable Minister was also alluding to, the vipers and how they can equally bite you. We cannot have the luxury of now turning a Nelson's eye to some of these wrong messagings which are being given out. And let me also say that if there is any kind of vehemence by spokespersons for any other religions, whether it is Hinduism or anybody else, also attacking other people of other faiths, they should be equally subjected to the most stringent state consequences, of incarceration. I would actually consider them fit candidates for being held under the National Security Act. And I've been in Punjab during long years of the so-called unfortunate militancy and all. And I completely agree with what Honorable Minister was repeatedly emphasizing. Anywhere in the world, if people think that to achieve some ends, they can attack innocent people, indulge in violence, provoke violence to actually encourage violence against them, killings, murders, assassinations. And then we say our strategic allies, the United States of America, and they refuse to extradite those people who are basically absolutely poisoning the entire atmosphere. So it's a very travesty kind of thing. And I would like to again say that we should be extremely, and this in fact should not just be at the national level. It must go down to every level of the state, the district, the subdivision. Everybody should be aware. In my area, is anybody saying something which can be a call to violence in the name of religion? And if it is, they should be identified and absolutely put behind the bars where they deserve to be. So that is my short comment on the book. It's a beautifully written book. Every page is very well researched, very well, also very readable. I congratulate him heartily, and I know, just the competence that you have put into it and the hard work is almost unparalleled. Ambassador Trigunayat was so helpful in terms of providing overall guidance to Abhinav ji as a very senior advisor in the foundation. And let me hope and pray by God's grace, this is a country in which everybody has said, Sarve bhavantu sukhina, Sarve santu niramaya, sabka bhala hona chahiye. We said it at the end of the Commonwealth Games. I said, India is one country which thrives on diversity. It does not fear diversity. Unfortunately, people in our neighboring Western country, they fear diversity. They can't even tolerate some Sufi sect in Islam. They can't tolerate the Shias. They can't tolerate the Ahmadiyas. Everybody who doesn't fall into line of their Wahhabi dogmas, Hanafi dogma, has to be considered kafir, fit for wajibul qatl. Sorry. This is not going to happen in India. And after hearing our Honorable Minister's speech and the amount of energy and clarity he put into it, I can tell you, with people like him in the center of governance, I am sure India will tread the path of conquering the evils of terrorism so far as our security is concerned. Thank you.
I want to say something. It's not a question, but I want to second and expand what Honorable Khanna said. Can I? Yeah, I'm Shivraj, and sir, you said about the madrasa education. I completely agree with you, and I want to elaborate further that one of my close friends, Governor of Kerala, Mr. Arif Muhammad Khan, has written a book on this subject. The name of the book is Text and Context. It is published by Rupa. And I was the person, when he completed the book, he called me. Then he was not governor. He called me and he said, Shivraj, I want to give the copy to you. I took the copies, and then there were threats to him many times. Fatwas were issued against him. He has clearly written in the book, and he personally told me that, Shivraj, if somebody studies in madrasa with this curriculum, it is very, although he has himself studied in madrasa, he said it is very difficult that the mind can operate scientifically. It is extremely difficult. Second such book is Heretic by Ayan Hirsi Ali. Yeah. So what you have said, I completely agree. Yeah. One more thing. I have studied from JNU, sir. Before studying in JNU, in my childhood school and in college, I have been to studied in all minority education, minority-run institutions. But I never faced any problem when I studied in Guru Nanak school. I was a minority. Sikhs were there in majority. I never faced any problem. That was the time of 1984. In 1990, I was studying in Zakir Hussain College in Delhi University. I never felt I'm a minority. But while studying in JNU, I felt I'm a minority, although Hindus were in majority there. And the same madrasa teaching which you are talking about, it is taught still in JNU in the curriculum. Those things are still there. We need to weed out that. And I'm very sure this government will seriously do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your insightful thoughts. Now I would like to request Anil sir to kindly come for felicitation. We now move on to the much anticipated book discussion. I would like to invite General Syed Atta Hasnain, who will chair the session. Joining him, We now move on to the much anticipated book discussion. I would like to invite General Syed Atta Hasnain, who will chair discussion. Joining him for the discussion are General R.K. Sahni, Shiv Murari Sahai, and the author himself, Dr. Abhinav Pandya. Sahai to share his remarks on the book.
डॉक्टर बिदूरी आइए। कैसा है? अभिनव कहाँ गए? इसकी किताब है वो तो हो कम से कम। And having dealt with organizations like the Jaish-E-Mohammed for good part of 30 years during my career in Kashmir, I must commend Abhinav for having written this book. From the point of view of a practitioner, it's a very good collection of facts. Till now, what we've heard and what has been spoken has been largely people's own experience of their efforts of counterterrorism. I think understanding Jaish itself and its various avatars is very important. Fundamentally, because it has got an ideological base. Unlike other terrorist organizations that are functioning in our neighborhood and in India, those are political instruments. The most comparable to the Jaish-e-Mohammed as an organization I would say is Lashkar-e-Taiba. But we all know that Lashkar-e-Taiba, though it subscribes to the ideology of the Ahle Hadith, it's actually a political instrument of the state of Pakistan. The Jaish, unlike the Lashkar, has been used by the Pakistanis for various acts of terrorism in India, but it has its own ideological base. And that ideological base is in Deoband, something that has been very well brought out in the book. And that is a problem because that ideological base, though it starts in India, it has spread over Afghanistan, Pakistan, parts of Central Asia. Now, those of you who recall the events of COVID, when the NSA, Mr. Ajit Doval had to go to the Bangla Masjid in Nizamuddin to flush out some of the people who were holed up there and they wanted to go back. There were at least people of 17 countries who were in the Bangla Masjid. And the book was also rightly brought out the impact of Deobandis through what is called the Tablighi Jamaat. Now, the Tablighi Jamaat was basically born in Haryana, what is the current day Haryana, when Khandvi wanted to educate the Mio Muslims. So he would preach them to them and then would encourage them to go and preach to other people. Because the Muos, even if you know currently, are a fairly uneducated lot of people. And so he wanted to kind of civilize them through using Islamic teachings. Now that has found its great base in Bangladesh. So Tablighi Jamaat and the Deobandis together have got a very large ideological base in the subcontinent, and that is why understanding Jaish-e-Mohammed is very important. When we say that understanding Jaish-e-Mohammed is very important, we have to also understand that why was the Deoband school created in the first place. So Deoband school came largely because after the events of 1857, the British were very nervous about the kind of unity that was displayed by the Hindus and Muslims during the mutiny. So they wanted to drive a wedge between the two communities. And the best way of doing it was to basically destroy any kind of accommodation that could be made by either community. Now, because the Hindus are a difficult community to radicalize in that sense, because it's too dispersed in its character, the Muslims were an easier target, and plus, by religious affinity, the Muslims have greater affinity to Christianity. So they created the Deoband school in 1867, again mentioned in the book, to basically start creating fundamentalism amongst Muslims to be able to create the divide. Now, if you think back onto the reasons why the Deobandis were created, why this became a political wedge, you'll understand what is the basic philosophy under which the Jaish-e-Mohammed operates. Currently, if you look at it, the events in the book are fairly elaborate. But I think what is important to understand is demographics, the use of technology, which play a very important role in the way this spreads. Because what has happened is that keeping in line with pan-Islamic thinking, technology today helps to create a different world. So when you use technology and social media, you are able to globally connect with a narrative. And that is where you find the danger of institutions like Jaish-e-Mohammed, because as I said, they are not instruments of state, they are not political instruments, so they will not have a directive that will control them. So they are not aligned to a political objective. They spread across countries and across places where you have Muslims living, and they are able to radicalize them in line of this. Second thing is that amongst the fundamentals of Islam, there is what you call proselytizing, what they call dawa. Invite people to the religion. So now this makes it much easier if you use technology and social media, and that is why you see that the Jaish-e-Mohammed's social organization is called Dawat-e-Irshad. And in countries where the youth population is increasing and going beyond 60%, which is largely in the subcontinent in our neighborhood, this becomes an increasing problem. Because it's known that when the population, the male population increases by over 25%, there is going to be turbulence, and that turbulence can be channelized. So this channelization of that turbulence in the name of religion, which gives a kind of a purpose, becomes a dangerous cocktail. And that is something that we should be careful about. Now we talk about the Jaish-e-Mohammed and its various forms. The original organization was the Huji, the Harkat-e-Jihad-e-Islami, which was actually a re-Christianed version of what was the Jamaat-e-Ansarul Afghaniyin, which was created in the 80s in Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. So what is important to understand is that, there is a religious philosophy, there is a certain kind of ideology. It is used from time to time by various countries. At one time it was the UK, and one time it is the United States that have been using them as their asymmetric option to fight various powers. Why in the current context this book becomes relevant, and I would recommend that most security practitioners should read it, is because we have got a problem in our neighborhood. The Jaish-e-Mohammed was also created out of the Huji. And today in Bangladesh, which has been one of the most active parts of areas where Houthis operated, in the future we're going to have trouble there. I will quote to you an article which was written by one of the former chiefs of staff of Bangladesh. His name is Iqbal Karim Bhuiyan. And he was reacting to some alleged remark made by some Indian minister about how, militarily Bangladesh could be controlled. I don't know whether such statement was made, but he's used that as an excuse. And he's talked about triple AD, which is asymmetric, alignment, adaptive, and deterrence. And when he talks about asymmetric, he's actually talking about the terrorism option. He talks about how there's a large youth population in Bangladesh who can be used to exfiltrate into India, because we've got a 4,000-kilometer border which is extremely porous. They can exfiltrate into all our neighboring states, whether it's West Bengal, Assam, Tripura, Manipur. And we know that there is a history where in Bangladesh, the northeast terrorist organizations have found a haven. In fact, current reports also indicate that those groups have started going back to the bases that they had in Bangladesh post Sheikh Hasina's government. So you see, the danger that lies with these kind of organizations, particularly an organization like Jaish-E-Mohammed, because they operate at very different levels. They will operate at an ideological level, they also operate at a military level, and they also operate at a social level. So wherever you find that these organizations have got interest, there will always be a social organization there. In the case of Lashkar, it's called the FIF, it is the Falai Insaniyat Foundation. In the case of Jaish-e-Mohammed, it's called Dawat-e-Irshad. Now the other problem that we find in the neighborhood in Bangladesh is that the Rohingyas have got encampments there. And those Rohingyas are involved with everything, which includes smuggling of drugs, human trafficking, smuggling of arms, fake Indian currency, and of course, spreading terrorism. So when you look at all these things happening there, you see that how ideology which is weaponized through an organization which is really not in control of under the control of any state with whom you can negotiate. For example, we do talk about the fact that we will not negotiate with Pakistan, but should we want to do that, you can negotiate on Lashkar. You can negotiate on the Hizbul Mujahideen, but you cannot negotiate on Jaish-e-Mohammed, because Jaish-e-Mohammed is beyond their purview. As we know that, mentioned in the book also, that Jaish-e-Mohammed was responsible for the attacks on Musharraf when he was the president of Pakistan. So if you look at all these things, you would understand that it's a far more dangerous organization, and I'm glad that Abhinav has been able to bring this out in the book about the nature of this organization and the danger it holds, not only for us, but for the entire subcontinent. And the danger lies is that a responsible official of the government of Bangladesh should write something like this. Now, when this is read with, for example, what the Ansarul Bangla team's chief, Rahmani, said after he got released, a few days after the deposition of Sheikh Hasina, he says, we have to now think in terms of the rebellion in Kashmir. We have to think in terms of the liberation of Khalistan. We have to think in terms of liberation of the Northeast. And he also goes on to say that Mamta should revolt. Mamta Banerjee should revolt and join them to revolt against India. So finally that the Indian state is dismembered and the Islamic flag can fly over Red Fort again. So you see one event on the 5th of August and the toppling of one government, how it has changed the entire dynamics of the subcontinent. So whereas the security establishment has to be conscious of this fact and has to fight the acts of terrorism. Now this is a question that comes up regarding the definition of terrorism. The UN has been able to define acts of terrorism. And as the Minister, Mr. Puri, was had put out, that terrorism is not getting defined because many countries see that it will lead to the suppression of genuine democratic nationalist movements, is how it came out in the UN. So the whole question remains is that who is a terrorist? And now if as long as terrorists are used as an instrument of a political government, however immoral, it is still a controllable phenomenon. But when it becomes an instrument of an ideological group which crosses boundaries, and not one or two, but several boundaries, it's a far more dangerous thing. So this is where I think the real danger of the Jaish-e-Mohammed lies. And I'm glad that Abhinav has chosen this as a subject for discussion. I would only just plead one case. Abhinav says that the Indian intelligence agencies are not attuned to factoring this in. I don't entirely agree with that, because I think the Indian security establishment in its various forms, and largely in the state polices, because India's security is largely dealt by the states. And all the states that have had a problem with terrorism have created very robust anti-terrorist organizations, whether they're called the SOGs or they're called the STFs or they're called Greyhounds or they're called Black Panthers, whatever names, ATS, they've got various names in various states, and they're fairly robust, and that is why one of the reasons why terrorism has been effectively countered in the country. But what have we been actually able to do? We've been able to counter the acts of terrorism. The question will remain with us is that how do we counter terrorism itself in its ideological form? There is much talk about the madrasas and the suppression of the madrasas. True, they provide an enabling environment, but in India's case, if you pick up the background of most of the terrorists, you will find none of them come from madrasas. And that is why it is more dangerous. Because are you looking in the right direction or not? Madrasas were created to create terrorists, they were created to create terrorists in Pakistan. The madrasas were factories basically to produce mujahideen to fight Soviets. In our case, it's a little different. So what are we looking at? We've got people who have been engineers, people who have been good at social media, who have been the actual sponsors of this act. So we are looking at a far more dangerous thing, because actually you won't be able to put a finger on it. The only part that I might agree with Abhinav's statement in the context of the security establishment is that, yes, this understanding doesn't take place. But who should do it? That's a big question. Do you leave it to intelligence agencies to make this assessment? Or does it need to a whole of government approach? Because it will require a lot of social and sociological engineering to be able to counter the ideological spread of this narrative. So I agree that maybe recording, documentation may be the responsibility of the intelligence agencies, but I think it will require a far more, a deeper understanding to counter it. Suppression can work to a point, but after some time we will need to have some kind of greater engagement and a counter to things of the spread of the organizations like the Jaish-e-Mohammed. I was particular to bring out the issue of Bangladesh because we all become very Pakistan-centric. But I feel that the real danger lies in Bangladesh. It's more than it being an ideological problem, and it's also going to be a big geopolitical issue. I think there are questions about why did Sheikh Hasina's government fall? Who was actually behind the fall of Sheikh Hasina's government in light of the statements she herself has made? In light of what the chief advisor, the statement he made in the Clinton Global Initiative and admitted that there was a deep conspiracy behind toppling Sheikh Hasina's government. The fact that the people who may have played a role in toppling her government, who are also friends of ours, what could be that intent? So I think the issue of the play of organizations like Jaish-e-Mohammed have got a geopolitical narrative context. It has to be seen in the overall interests of the major powers, whether it be China, whether it be United States, in this region. I will leave you with that thought because I think these are all interconnected issues and we need to look at it in its entirety before we fight it. It's not going to be sufficient that you just keep catching terrorists, arresting them or neutralizing them. It has to go a little more beyond that. So I'll rest with that. Thank you very much. I would imagine that after a high tea and many lectures, there should not be many questions. But yes, sir, please.
I think it would be fair to have a rejoinder from Abhinav on that. And I would like to request a particular context. In fact, that context, I haven't had time to read the whole book, but I didn't find that context. But this other Mahmood, sorry, which is it? Mahmood?
Masood.
Masood, yeah, so my memory served right, okay. So Azhar Masood was first arrested, if I remember right, in 1994.
Right.
Right? And we had him in custody for 5 years. Plenty of time for our agencies to have made play. And contrast with this with another episode. 1 year later, in 1995, you had Harun, who went by the name Mustgul, who makes an intervention, is eventually, that intervention plays out. He is escorted back to Pakistan, and as events follow, he apparently becomes an Indian asset, and the Pakistanis declare him persona non grata. Two very distinct and different case studies of how our agencies would have handled similar insurgents. Azhar, if I remember right, had come to settle, to broker peace between two warring factions in Kashmir when he was arrested.
You're right.
Okay. So I'm just talking, because these two situations contrast, especially given the fact that Azhar was in the custody of our agencies for 5 years. And I have, I too have had the occasion to be in bed for 5 years, kind of a prison, not maybe a government enforced one, but it gives you an opportunity to perforce you have nothing else to do, so you end up reading. And it does leave a very great impact on you. The fact that Azhar read because Azhar pre that internment and post that internment, that is where he got his hand, and he actually read the hadith, which has made him such a great Islamist preacher of sorts, wherein he has, as Abhinav brings out, that it is that aspect of his abilities which makes him the quintessential leader of jihad. Something which was nurtured in Indian prison. So is that not a very obvious failure of our of the way we handled his internment for 5 years with us? That is one aspect. The empowerment of Azhar, another aspect which I didn't find in the book. But a lot of us know that at that point of time, the Afghans and the Pakistanis were so taken up with the Indian system that they asked for 100 crore rupees as the ransom, right? Which has now been openly admitted by them at several forums. We can't admit it here because the debit in the controller of exchange's account is 4 times that. Not 4, 40 times that or plus. And you know the dollar rupee which happened between what was debited here and what was paid there.
I would imagine that would amount to conjecture, but yes.
No. That is why I've cited the place where you'll find the record to verify. The debit with the Cox department of the RBI, from where the money was drawn. Now, that said, so it's no longer conjecture. That said, what was the role of was there an experiment being planned with Azhar also which failed when he was handed over and released? The Must-Bull experiment didn't fail. Not only did it succeed then, when the Pakis declared him persona non grata, he is now in the forefront of all the troubles of Pakistan with the TTP. So, the role and the...
Can I just...
I
think the point you're trying to...
hear both you and Abhinav on this.
The thing is that Maulana Masood Azhar was never an Indian asset. And I think several attempts which have been described in the book were made to get him released. The problem was that Maulana Masood Azhar felt that he was unjustly kept because he was an ideologue and not a terrorist. So there was, and that's why he likes to call himself Maulana. So that's again been brought out in the book. So it's very clearly, very evident as to why. So no, I think that was something that was in the process. That's the reason why he was also sent. Now that I think is very clear, and he was sent in exchange. We all are aware. Nothing to talk about. Regarding Must-Bull, whether he was an Indian asset, I don't think so. The reason why he had to be created as a PNG was because he was responsible for burning down the shrine of the Charar-e-Sharif, and that was something that was not acceptable to the Kashmiris. Whatever, I mean that you can keep stating formally and informally, but the reality is that Kashmiris believe that it was he who was responsible for setting it on fire, and Charar-e-Sharif is the most revered shrine of Kashmir. So they had to distance themselves from that. That's the very simple explanation of what actually transpired between those two gentlemen. If Abhinav wants to come and defend his position, he's most welcome to. Otherwise, I think we can call it an evening. It's been a long time. Abhinav, you want to defend your position about my disagreement about the security establishment? Huh? Please do. I've also given part of your answer.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would like to invite Dr. Inita Jain to felicitate, sir. Now I would like to call upon stage Dr. Abhinav Pandya to felicitate Ambassador Anil Trigunayal. Okay. And deliver his vote of thanks.
Thank you very much. So I'll just first begin with the most difficult part, defending something which Sahai sir has just mentioned. First of all, let me make it very clear at the outset that I'm not being critical of our intelligence and security apparatus. In fact, in all my books, my previous book particularly, Terror Financing in Kashmir, I have written explicitly about the dilemma that our intelligence agencies and the security apparatus face. And in Kashmir, I must say, as an academic who observes things from outside, I must say that they have done a wonderful job for the last 50 years in keeping Kashmir away from the glare of the internationalization of so many conflict theaters that we see around the world. But when I criticize that they need better understanding, then that's at a very, very tactical level, definitely at policy level also in some respects. I'll just mention a few examples. So Jammu and Kashmir is a model state. Police in Jammu and Kashmir, definitely it has come out as the best counter-terrorism force also the state intelligence. But the situation in the other states is not that impressive, I must say. In my city, Udaipur, so there was one case in which Taylor was killed in a very ISIS-style beheading by two chaps after the Nupur Sharma episode. Now the background to that incident was that Labbaik movement. After the Charlie Hebdo, that cartoon episode, the biggest protest against that happened in Udaipur, in my city. The biggest protest in all over India. And that was almost on the verge of breaking into a very massive violence. Now if that protest took place in a small, sleepy, remote city like Udaipur, there must have been some background. As an observer, I can say that only. There must have been some movement of the Labbaik activists or people who are working in that circuit, either through the visits of the imams or through the encrypted communication applications in that region. Because without a certain background, they cannot stage such a massive protest. But even after that protest, the state intelligence, the state police services, for them it was just a law and order event and that's it. They completely forgot. When this Nupur Sharma incident happened, ideally they should have, if they had taken care of the movement of the Labbaik activists in my city after that big protest, they might have had some idea, they might have developed some idea of how things are unfolding in the city. Finally, when this fellow went and lodged a complaint to the local police officers, some of them said that, well, you should just go and apologize to this fellow and that this is a very trivial matter, because the local fellow, the concerned, the local police official, the intelligence fellow, he did not understand the implications of this whole idea of blasphemy. I mean, he didn't know what this implies for a Muslim. When he says that, this blasphemy has taken place, then this means, something which is going to get to the stage of wajibul qatl. He also spoke to some local leaders, but then he got no respite. He could not meet the SP because he was too small to meet the SP. IGP didn't give him an audience. So those were the lapses which we could find out. Besides that, I must say, like in my state particularly, I can say this because my father has served in the state police services for about 32, 35 years, and so I mean, I don't claim to be an expert, but still, since I come from that background, so I happen to have a slightly nuanced understanding of the system. So in my state, people who who were not considered worthy of field postings, they got postings in the intelligence, or who were corrupt or who had to be marginalized, who were too honest, they were shunted to these postings, and they had very meager resources. Even the IB setup, let's say in my district, is a very small setup where you cannot keep track of many of the developments. These days in southern Rajasthan, a lot of things are happening in terms of the Nakshal stuff, and also the international Islamist activities are also very active. But then the police, the intelligence is mostly reactive. So when this Kanhaiya Lal's killing took place, after that I was speaking to the new IGP who got posted there, and he told me that, Abhinav, I just got a chance to see some of the WhatsApp communications and I had bloody no idea what is this whole thing going on here. Like, you see a completely different picture of this sleepy remote city. Likewise, so these are the issues which, I'm just mentioning as few examples, but I must say that, well, people working in the intelligence, they have a very limited mandate. Ultimately, it's the political bosses who decide things. And when I say this, I would really like to highlight that, we know what the threats are, like, for example, PFI, Jamaat-e-Islami. At the level of the, local intelligence or the security establishment, they can do what their limited authority permits them. But finally, it has to come from the political authority. So yes, I must say, we need a very active, not reactive, and a very active police and intelligence setup. And also, I think in the intelligence setup, we have a very police-driven mindset, but I feel that the intelligence is something which is a very wide subject, and now we cannot have a typical law and order mindset, for conducting the affairs of the intelligence in today's world, because today intelligence is about big-scale propaganda wars, the think tanks, the narratives, discourses, even films. For example, Ertugrul Ghazi, which was a big, movie project from Turkey, which it had a very robust geopolitical motive.
So intelligence is expanding because of the advent of technology, sophistication in various other scientific dimensions. This is a field which requires continuous innovations, expansion and overhauling, revitalization. So that's all I have to say in terms of, I don't think, I mean, I'm not really sure if it's a very apt rejoinder, but yes, I have tried to, put my point across. With this, I would like to thank S.M. Sahai sir for his very insightful remarks, and I must say that for me he has been an inspiration and a mentor, because we have learned counterterrorism and all these affairs by listening to his stories in Kashmir, and I can vouch for this. In Kashmir, if you go, he is very dearly known as General Sahai. He is that dear to the people, and he could actually motivate a lot of people to come back to the mainstream from militancy, and those are real nice incidents. I think a book needs to be written on that approach also. So thank you very much, sir, for your insightful remarks, and I would like to thank all of you for joining us today, for sparing your time, and also to the guests who left here, General Hasnain, General Sahani, Tejendra Khanna Sahab, Honorable Minister Puri, Ambassador Trigunayat. Lastly, I would say that a lot of people who from Jammu and Kashmir, I have not mentioned their names, but they have played a crucial role in this book, and in supporting me, assisting me. Unfortunately, because of obvious security reasons, their names cannot be mentioned, but my heartfelt thanks to those people, members of the Jammu and Kashmir Police, Security Forces, Indian Army. My friend Colonel Kapil is sitting here. He has seen me working in Jammu and Kashmir. So my heartfelt thanks to those. And this book, I think, not only for the people who are working in this domain, but also for the ordinary, I would say, citizens who are slightly interested in security issues. This book, I think that, this should be slightly interesting, and this should be a very useful book, because terrorism and radicalization challenges are not confined to security forces anymore. They are something which we are seeing them unfolding on our streets, in our cities, in our towns, and this problem is going to get much more serious. So this discipline needs to be encouraged in India. And I had many difficulties writing this kind of a book, because first of all, in India, the data regarding these clandestine subjects is with the security agencies and police officials, and it's very difficult to access that data because it's not in our system. Unlike in the Western countries, they have a very structured system to write books on these issues. But then in our system, this is not the case, and this is the reason why most of our books on radicalization, terrorism, they have a very theoretical, I would say, theoretical dominance, and they are mostly written sitting here in the capital city, but we need more of the field work. I have tried to do my best, my little effort in this subject. Hopefully you'll enjoy the book, and thank you very much for coming. Okay. My also heartfelt thanks to Dr. Arvind Gupta, Vivekanand Foundation, who supported me in this research, and to Mr. C.D. Sahai, Distinguished Fellow, Vivekanand Foundation. He's not here, he was coming here, but he got stuck in the traffic, for his invaluable guidance and blessings during my journey in this field. And once again, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would like to request everyone to please stand up for national anthem.